The pre-dawn chill of Birmingham, Alabama, clung to the air like a damp shroud that morning. It wasn't the biting, snow-promising cold, but the insidious kind that seeped into your bones, painting your breath in wisps of white and making your fingertips ache. Jonathan Reeves, a man whose tailored suits and meticulously styled silver hair usually commanded attention, now sat slumped in his dark silver Range Rover, the engine idling, a silent testament to his exhaustion. The gleam of the luxury vehicle, usually a source of quiet pride, felt like a hollow mockery under the harsh, fluorescent glow of the Children's Medical Center. For 6 months, this sterile, imposing building had been the epicenter of his shattered world. 6 months since the backyard swing set, a seemingly innocuous structure, had given way, twisting in a grotesque dance of metal and wood, and in an instant, stealing the light from his 6-year-old daughter Isla. Her vivacious brown curls, once a whirlwind of energy, now lay still against the booster seat. Her eyes, wide and luminous, reflected a silence that was far more profound than any spoken word. Paralyzed from the waist down, the doctors offered clinical terms: spinal contusion, guarded prognosis, extensive rehabilitation. Jonathan, a high-stakes real estate developer, had built his empire on control and predictability. Now, his life was a chaotic freefall, every calculation meaningless. His wife, unable to bear the relentless sorrow, had retreated first into herself, then out of their marriage entirely, leaving Jonathan to navigate this desolate landscape alone. A silent, unacknowledged chasm growing between him and the daughter he once chased through sun-dappled parks. Across the street, perched on a flattened cardboard box near the hospital's revolving doors, sat a boy who seemed to embody everything Jonathan was not. Zeke Carter, barely 9 years old, was a stark silhouette against the city's indifferent sprawl. His coat, several sizes too large, swallowed his small frame, its sleeves rolled up to reveal worn cuffs. One boot, its toe split, was mended with a crude bandage of gray duct tape. A faded red knit beanie rested low on his forehead, barely covering his ears against the persistent cold. He didn't beg, didn't solicit, didn't even meet the eyes of the hurried passers-by. He simply sat, a weather-beaten notebook open in his lap, his small hand moving with quiet purpose, sketching the world around him. He was there most Saturdays, a fixture that the hospital staff had long ceased to challenge. He was no trouble, just a quiet observer, a ghost in the periphery of their bustling, desperate lives. Most assumed he had family inside, a sick sibling, or was simply waiting for a ride. No one asked too many questions in a place where questions often led to more pain. Jonathan finally stirred, the weight of his daughter's fragile body a familiar ache in his arms as he carefully lifted her from the car. He walked with a heavy, deliberate pace towards the entrance, his gaze fixed on the imposing glass doors, avoiding the reflection of his own weary face. He didn't see Zeke at first. His world narrowed to the path ahead, the next appointment, the next hollow promise of hope. But Zeke saw him. He saw the way Jonathan held Isla, like she was spun from glass and might shatter at any moment. He saw the child's eyes, fixed on the gray sky, avoiding the building that housed so much pain. Zeke's pencil stilled. He watched them, a flicker of something ancient and knowing in his young eyes. Just as they were about to pass the revolving doors, a soft voice cut through the hum of the city, clear and unwavering. "Sir," Zeke called out, standing up, his notebook tucked under his arm. "I can make your daughter walk again." Jonathan stopped dead, not out of anger or confusion, but because of the sheer, unshakable conviction in the boy's voice. It wasn't a plea or a joke or a sales pitch. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet certainty of a sunrise. He turned, his sharp jawline tightening. "What did you just say?" Zeke didn't flinch. He took a single step forward, his taped boot scuffing softly on the concrete. "I said, I can help her walk again." Jonathan's grip tightened around Isla. "That's not funny, kid." His voice was rough, edged with a raw protectiveness. "I wasn't joking." Zeke's voice held no tremor, no childish waver, just that grown-up stillness, an unnerving calm in such a small body. Jonathan's eyes raked over Zeke's worn clothes, the crude duct tape, the cracked lenses of the glasses hanging from the boy's shirt collar. This had to be some cruel, bizarre coincidence. A street scam perhaps, though for what he couldn't imagine. He turned abruptly and walked into the hospital, the revolving doors swallowing him and Isla whole. But inside, the boy's words burrowed into his mind. A persistent, irritating itch. I can make your daughter walk again. The tone, the absolute certainty, refused to be dismissed. He sat through Isa's appointments like a phantom, nodding at therapists and neurologists who spoke in familiar, deflating phrases. Managing expectations? Long road ahead. Miracles take time. Each clinical word was a dull thud against the sharp echo of Zeke's impossible promise. By early afternoon, the sun had finally broken through the clouds, painting the cold air in a pale, watery light. Jonathan carried Isla out, her head resting on his shoulder, her body heartbreakingly light. As he approached the Range Rover, he saw him again. Zeke, still there. Same box, same notebook. And this time, the boy was looking directly at him, as if he had known Jonathan would return. Jonathan hesitated, then lowered Isa gently into the back seat. He stood, rubbing the bridge of his nose, the internal battle raging. He should just leave. He should call security. But something held him rooted. You again, he muttered, walking over. Why would you say something like that? You think this is funny? Zeke shook his head slowly. No, sir. You don't even know her. You don't know what she's been through. Jonathan snapped, his voice rising, raw with months of suppressed pain. You don't know what we've been through. I don't have to know her to help. Zeke didn't back down, his gaze steady. Jonathan straightened up, his eyes narrowing. You're what, 9? 10? You're a little boy sitting outside a hospital with duct tape on your shoes. What could you possibly know about helping someone like my daughter? Zeke looked down, his fingers tracing the edge of his notebook. My mama used to help people walk again, he said quietly, his voice a whisper against the city sounds. She was a physical therapist. She taught me stuff. She said the body remembers things, even when it forgets for a while. Jonathan stared at him, skepticism hardening in his chest. So what? You watched her do some stretches and now you think you're a doctor. I watched her help a man walk after being in a chair for 5 years, Zeke said, his eyes lifting, meeting Jonathan's. She didn't have machines or nurses, just her hands, her patience and faith. Jonathan opened his mouth to retort, then stopped. He glanced around. A nurse passed by, giving Zeke a small, familiar wave. A janitor from the hospital nodded in the boy's direction. They all seemed to know him. They didn't treat him like a nuisance, but like a fixture. I'm not giving you money, Jonathan stated, anticipating a hustle. I didn't ask for money. Then what do you want? Zeke took a deep breath, his small chest rising. He stepped forward. Just 1 hour. Let me show you. Jonathan looked back at Isla, who had now opened her eyes and was watching them, quietly, intently. He sighed, a heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of his world. I should walk away right now, he didn't. I should call security, he didn't. Finally, he huffed, the sound a mix of exasperation and a sliver of something he refused to name. Fine. You want to waste your time, kid? Meet us at Harrington Park tomorrow noon. Don't be late. Zeke nodded once, a solemn, unwavering gesture. I'll be there. Jonathan climbed into the SUV, started the engine, and pulled away without looking back. But in the rearview mirror, Zeke was still standing there, hands at his sides, face unreadable, a small, solitary figure against the vast, indifferent hospital wall. Back home, in the cavernous silence of his sprawling house on Crestview Drive, Jonathan sat in his home office, surrounded by untouched contracts and legal documents that once defined his existence. Now, they were meaningless hieroglyphs. His mind was a turbulent sea, Zeke's words a lighthouse beacon he desperately wanted to ignore, yet couldn't. Isla poked her head into the room, her wheelchair a soft hum against the polished wood floor. Daddy! He turned, the weariness etched deep in his face. Yeah, baby? Who was that boy? Her voice was a fragile whisper. Jonathan paused. Just somebody we met outside the hospital. He looked like he believed it, she said, her eyes wide. Believed what? That I could walk. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips as she ran her fingers across the armrest of her wheelchair. A silent mimicry of legs. Jonathan stared, a tremor passing through him. For the first time in a long time, something inside him didn't feel numb. It felt dangerous, a spark of hope in a world he thought was devoid of it. Harrington Park was not a place of manicured lawns or designer playgrounds. It was the forgotten heart of a struggling neighborhood. A cracked basketball court, a few swings with chains that shrieked like tortured spirits, and a patch of grass that aspired to be a soccer field. On Sundays, it was usually a desolate expanse, especially around noon. But this Sunday, Zeke was already there, a small sentinel on the bench closest to the sprawling oak tree. He wore the same oversized jacket, but his notebook was tucked away. At his feet sat a small, worn gym bag, and a folded towel lay neatly beside him. At 12:07, Jonathan's Range Rover pulled up, a stark contrast to the park's faded grandeur. He didn't speak, just extracted Isla, settled her gently into her wheelchair, and wheeled her towards Zeke. His arms were crossed tight across his chest, a defensive posture, as if he was already regretting this absurd concession. Zeke stood as they approached. "Hi again," he said politely, his voice calm. Jonathan gave a stiff nod. Isla, usually withdrawn, offered a shy wave. Zeke's face, usually so solemn, broke into a small, genuine smile. "Hi, Isa." Her eyes lit up, a fleeting spark of her old self. "Hi." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "How do you know her name?" "You said it yesterday," Zeke replied, his gaze unwavering. "I remember stuff." Jonathan didn't respond, merely gestured at the towel. "So what now?" "Magic carpet ride." The cynicism was a shield. Zeke ignored the jab. "No, sir. Just the basics." He opened his bag and pulled out a pair of clean, white socks, a well-worn tennis ball, a small jar of cocoa butter, and a plastic container wrapped in cloth, radiating a gentle warmth. Jonathan squinted. "What is all that stuff?" "My mom used it," Zeke answered simply. "The rice pack is for heat, helps loosen tight muscles. The ball is for pressure points." Jonathan folded his arms again, a silent dare. Zeke turned to Isla. "If it's okay, can I work with your legs for a little while? Nothing hurts. Promise. And if anything feels weird, just say stop. Okay?" Isla looked up at her dad, a question in her eyes. Jonathan sighed. "You can try. Just be careful." Zeke knelt beside her chair, his movements surprisingly gentle for a child. He carefully unwrapped the blanket from her legs, revealing their pale, still form, and placed the warm rice pack over her thighs. Isla flinched slightly. "Too hot?" he asked, his voice soft. She shook her head. "It feels good." Zeke nodded, waiting patiently for the warmth to penetrate. After a few minutes, he began to gently move her legs. Not yanking, not forcing, just small, deliberate rotations, side to side, up and down, a dancer guiding a lifeless limb. Jonathan watched, his jaw tight, ready to intervene at the slightest sign of discomfort. But nothing went wrong. "You ever do this before?" Jonathan asked, suspicion still lacing his tone. Zeke didn't look up, his focus entirely on Isla's legs. "My mama used to take me to shelters after school. She helped veterans, folks who couldn't afford therapy. Said, everybody deserves to feel human again. I used to carry her bag." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "And she taught you this stuff?" "Yeah." Said the body don't always need fancy, just attention. He tapped lightly on Isla's knee with his knuckle. "You feel that?" "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Zeke nodded again, unfazed. "That's okay. I'll keep asking." He continued to talk to her while he worked, asking about her favorite colors, her favorite food, what shows she liked to watch. At first, her answers were short, hesitant. But then, she started asking him questions. "Do you live around here?" Kind of. Do you go to school? I used to. Why not anymore? Zeke hesitated, his movements slowing slightly. My mom got sick, then she passed. Been trying to figure things out since. Isla looked down, her own small world of pain connecting with his. I'm sorry. Zeke gave her a small, sad smile. Thanks. Jonathan's posture softened imperceptibly, but he remained silent. After about 30 minutes, Zeke gently tapped her ankle again. You feel that? Isla blinked, her brow furrowed in concentration. A little, like pressure. Zeke looked up at Jonathan, his eyes alight. That's good. Jonathan squinted. She sometimes says that during her regular sessions. Yeah, Zeke replied, his voice calm. But those sessions are inside a room full of machines. Sometimes kids get scared of machines. They tighten up. But here, he gestured to the open park, the sunlight filtering through the oak leaves. There's air, trees, feels different. Jonathan didn't say anything, but he was definitely listening now. Zeke helped Isla stretch both legs, then showed her some simple movements to try with her toes. Just wiggling, she tried. Nothing obvious happened, no sudden miracle, but she didn't look discouraged. I'll show you again next week, Zeke said, standing up. It takes time, but your muscles, he pointed to her thighs. They still remember how to be used. You just got to remind them. Isla smiled, a wider, brighter smile this time. Okay. Jonathan cleared his throat. We're not promising anything, he said quickly, almost defensively. Zeke nodded. I'm not either. I'm just trying. Jonathan stared at him for a long second. Then, without warning, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded bill and held it out. Zeke stepped back. No, sir. I don't want your money. Jonathan looked genuinely surprised. Then why are you doing this? Zeke shrugged, his small shoulders rising and falling. Because your daughter smiled. Jonathan looked down at Isla. She was still smiling, a genuine, hopeful curve to her lips. He didn't understand how a boy who had seemingly lost everything could give so much to a girl he barely knew. But the warmth in his chest, that dangerous spark, was growing. The following Sunday was warmer, the air hinting at the approaching spring, but Zeke still wore his oversized jacket. Not because he needed it for warmth, but because it made him feel like his mom was close. She used to call it his helper's coat, said every good healer needed something that reminded them why they cared. He was already at Harrington Park by 11:45, the towel laid out, supplies lined up, a bottle of water beside him. A few kids played basketball on the cracked court nearby, their shouts echoing faintly. Someone's dog barked in the distance. At exactly noon, Jonathan's SUV rolled up. Isla was grinning before the car even stopped. Zeke waved. Hi, Isa. Hi, she chirped, her curls bouncing as Jonathan helped her into the wheelchair. Jonathan looked tired again, but different this time, less weighed down. He gave Zeke a small nod, no words, but it was more than last week. Zeke got to work. Same setup, same warm cloth pack, same gentle movements. But this time something had shifted. Isla was trying now. Can you press your heel into the ground? Zeke asked gently. She closed her eyes, concentrating, her small face a mask of effort. Nothing happened. It's okay, he said, his voice a steady bomb. Sometimes it takes your brain a while to find the right path. It's like trying to walk through a crowd. You just got to push through. Jonathan stood behind them, arms crossed again, but this time more to keep warm than to wall himself off. Why do you do all this? He asked suddenly, the question escaping before he could stop it. Zeke glanced up, his eyes meeting Jonathan's. Because I remember what it felt like when my mom used to help people. She made them feel like they mattered. I want to do that too. Jonathan nodded slowly. You ever think about doing something else? Sometimes, Zeke admitted, then looked back at Isla. But this feels right. Jonathan watched Isla. She was tapping her toes, barely, but they moved. For the first time, he didn't speak. He just watched, a silent witness to a quiet, profound unfolding. The next few weekends, they kept coming. Same time, same place. Zeke taught Isla how to use rubber bands to strengthen her ankles. He rolled tennis balls under her feet to help her brain remember where they were, how they felt. He showed Jonathan how to massage pressure points behind her knees and explained how each nerve had a job to do, even when it went quiet. Jonathan, surprisingly, absorbed every instruction, every explanation, his skepticism slowly eroding, replaced by a nascent, fragile hope. Then came the bad day. It was the fourth Sunday. Zeke showed up like always, his small bag in hand. But when the SUV pulled up, Isla wasn't smiling. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her lower lip trembled. Jonathan looked angry, a tense coil of frustration. "She doesn't want to do it today," he said sharply as he lifted her into the chair. Isla refused to look at either of them, her small body rigid. Zeke approached slowly. "What happened?" Isla crossed her arms, her voice tight with suppressed tears. "I tried to move my legs this morning and nothing happened. Nothing. I'm tired of trying. It's pointless." Jonathan looked away, his jaw tight. "She's been frustrated all weekend. The physical therapist at the hospital said it's normal to hit plateaus. But she feels like giving up." Zeke nodded. He knelt beside her again, his voice soft, resonating with an unexpected depth. "You think I never get tired?" Isla didn't answer, but her eyes, still averted, flickered. "You think I didn't sit in a shelter and cry when my mom couldn't afford medicine and I had to just sit there and watch?" Her eyes shifted towards him now, a flicker of surprise. "You're allowed to be mad. I'm mad sometimes, too. But if you stop now, the part of you that wants to walk might stop trying, too." He paused, letting the words sink in. Isla stared at the ground, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I don't want you to give up," he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. "Because I haven't." Silence hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fears. Then Isla whispered, so quietly Jonathan almost missed it, "I'm scared." It was the first time she'd voiced that profound fear out loud. Zeke leaned in closer, his small hand reaching out to gently touch her knee. "I am too sometimes. Scared don't mean stop. It just means you're close to something big." Isla wiped her face with the back of her hand, a renewed resolve flickering in her tear-filled eyes. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger. "Let's try again." And they did. Zeke guided her through the motions gently, with less talking this time, just presence, patience, and a quiet, unyielding belief. Jonathan stepped in more too, helping her shift weight, encouraging every small twitch. He was no longer a cynical observer, but an active participant, his hands now familiar with the contours of Isla's legs, his voice a steady murmur of encouragement. After 30 minutes, Isla moved her right foot. Not just a toe, her whole foot. Slid forward, slow and stiff, but it moved. Jonathan knelt beside her, blinking like he wasn't sure he'd seen it right. "Do it again," he said, his voice choked. "She did." Zeke smiled, a rare, radiant display. He didn't say anything else, just sat back and watched, his quiet triumph a beacon in the still park. Later that night, Jonathan stood outside his house, staring at the moon. He'd stopped asking himself who Zeke really was. The question didn't matter anymore. Inside, Isla was giggling, retelling the footslide moment to her aunt on speakerphone, her voice filled with a lightness that hadn't graced their home in months. For the first time since the accident, their house didn't feel like a hospital room. Felt like home again. But something inside Jonathan had started to shift. Not just his daughter's legs, but the weight in his own chest, the crushing guilt, the suffocating pride, the impenetrable wall he'd built between himself and the world. It was cracking slowly, surely. Monday afternoon, Jonathan sat in his office, staring at an untouched contract. His phone buzzed every few minutes, emails, calls, client updates, but none of it felt urgent anymore. What kept looping in his mind was that moment in the park, Isla's foot sliding forward like it belonged to her again. He'd seen it with his own eyes. And the person who made it happen was a 9-year-old with taped-up boots and no last name he'd ever heard before. He opened a new browser tab and typed, "Ezekiel Carter, Birmingham." Nothing came up except a few scattered results. Old local newsletters, school databases. A few mentions of an Ezekiel Carter and his mother, Monique Carter, at a community clinic years ago. No current address, no recent info. He shut the laptop and leaned back. This kid was a ghost. Except he wasn't. He was real. And he was alone. By Saturday, they were back at Harrington Park. But things felt profoundly different. Jonathan brought an extra mat and a fold-out chair. He handed Zeke a sandwich when they arrived. A simple gesture. No words, just placed it beside his gym bag. Zeke gave a small, quiet thanks and tucked it away for later. "Ready, Isla?" he asked. She gave a big thumbs up. "Let's do it." They settled into the routine: heat packs, stretches, toe flexes. Today, Jonathan joined in fully. He sat cross-legged on the grass, doing each motion Zeke explained. He even messed it up once, his corporate stiffness betraying him. "You're bending the wrong way," Zeke said with a grin, a flash of genuine childhood mischief. Jonathan gave him a side-eye. "I haven't stretched since college." They laughed, even Isla. The air was lighter, filled not just with the sounds of the park, but with a nascent camaraderie. About 20 minutes in, Zeke leaned forward. "All right, I say. Let's try something different." He unfolded a belt from his bag, a simple leather belt, and placed it under her knees, showing Jonathan how to hold each end. "She's gonna try to lift both knees now, just a little. We help balance her. She controls the movement." Jonathan blinked. "You sure?" Zeke nodded. "She's ready." They gave her a few seconds. Her brow tightened, eyes narrowed in fierce concentration. She grunted softly, a sound of immense effort, and then her knees lifted slightly, barely an inch off the ground, but they lifted. Jonathan looked at her, stunned. "You did that." She smiled, a triumphant, radiant smile. "I did it." He swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "You really did it." Zeke nodded slowly, his eyes on the belt. "See? The body remembers. You just have to be patient enough to let it talk." Jonathan looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a strange, homeless kid, but as something profound. "You're something else, kid." Zeke didn't respond, just started gently guiding Isla through the next stretch. After the session, as they packed up, Jonathan crouched beside Zeke. "Where do you go after this?" Zeke shrugged, a familiar, evasive gesture. "Around." Jonathan lowered his voice, his gaze steady. "You got a place to sleep?" Zeke hesitated, his eyes darting away, then back. "Sometimes." Jonathan exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. The casualness of the answer hit him like a physical blow. This child, who had given his daughter hope, was living on the streets. "You ever think about coming to stay with us for a while?" Zeke's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief. "You serious? I got a guest room. You wouldn't be in the way." Zeke looked down at his hands, raw and chapped from the cold. "You sure your neighbors wouldn't mind a kid like me?" Jonathan gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Man, after what you've done for my daughter, they'd better not say a word." Zeke didn't answer right away, but Jonathan could see the wheels turning in his young mind. The next morning, Zeke stood outside Jonathan's home, a worn backpack slung over one shoulder, a rolled-up blanket tucked under his arm. Jonathan opened the door in sweatpants and a coffee mug. "Right on time," he said, a genuine smile on his face. Isla, already awake and dressed, wheeled herself to the front hallway. "Zeke," she chirped, her face lighting up. He smiled, a gentle, familiar warmth in his eyes. "Hey, superstar." Jonathan stepped aside, gesturing into the welcoming warmth of the house. "Welcome home." The days that followed were quiet but profoundly meaningful. Zeke got his own room, a soft bed, clean sheets, and a small desk by the window. He didn't say much, still reserved, but he never missed a morning stretch with Isla. She was moving both feet now, not walking yet, but the wheels were turning. Her brain was reaching out to her legs like it remembered the connection, the forgotten pathways reigniting. One night, as Jonathan cleaned dishes, he paused and leaned on the counter, watching Zeke sketching at the kitchen table. "Zeke," he said over his shoulder. "You ever think about going back to school?" Zeke glanced up. "Sometimes." Jonathan nodded. "You're smart. You could go far." Zeke tilted his head, his gaze earnest. "I want to help people walk again, like my mama did." Jonathan turned to face him, a hand reaching out to rest on the boy's shoulder. "Then let's figure out how to get you there." Zeke gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Okay." They didn't say much more that night. They didn't need to. But for the first time in years, the Reeves household wasn't full of silence or the sterile hum of medical equipment. It was full of small, hopeful noises that meant life. Footsteps, soft laughter, the quiet scratch of a pencil on paper, and the profound, undeniable sound of healing. It started subtly. A nurse from the Children's Medical Center, walking her dog through Harrington Park one Sunday morning, spotted a familiar face, Isla. She hadn't seen her outside her wheelchair in months, let alone smiling, lifting her knees, moving her toes. And standing beside her was the same quiet kid who used to sit by the hospital doors every weekend. The nurse didn't interrupt, just watched from a distance for a while, a seed of wonder taking root. Then she went home and told her sister, who happened to work in patient services. A few days later, a physical therapist at the hospital mentioned to Jonathan, "Hey, someone told me Isla's improving. That true?" Jonathan nodded, a quiet pride in his voice. "Yeah. Thanks to someone we weren't expecting." Word spread fast, a ripple through the network of parents whose lives revolved around hope and heartbreak. The next time they showed up to Harrington Park, 2 other families were waiting at the bench near the big oak tree. One had a boy who used a walker, the other, a girl recovering from a stroke. Both parents had heard about the kid who helped the Reeves girl move her legs again. Zeke looked at Jonathan, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. Jonathan looked right back at him, a steady, reassuring presence. "You don't have to," he said quietly. Zeke adjusted the strap on his bag, his gaze sweeping over the waiting families, the hopeful faces. "I want to." He gave up his usual time with Isla that day to work with the 2 new kids. He showed their parents how to use the same towel stretches, how to warm the rice packs just right, how to encourage without pushing too hard. And he talked to the kids, not at them, his voice gentle and firm. "You're not broken," he told one of them. "You're just learning a different way to be strong." Isla watched everything from her wheelchair, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't complain once. Later that afternoon on the drive home, she said, "I like watching him help people." Jonathan glanced at her in the rearview mirror, a soft smile on his face. Yeah, it makes me feel like I'm part of something good." By the next weekend, 5 families showed up. The week after that, it was 11. A local pastor brought folding chairs. A nearby diner started dropping off bagels and coffee. Someone printed flyers that read, "Free movement classes, Sundays at noon, Harrington Park." They didn't mention Zeke's name. He'd asked them not to, but everyone knew who it was. A local reporter showed up with a camera and a notepad. Jonathan pulled Zeke aside. "You okay with this?" Zeke looked around at the growing community, at the families, at the kids moving their limbs, at Isla laughing with a girl on a walker. He nodded. "As long as it's not about me, it's about them." The reporter wrote her piece. It ran on the second page of the Birmingham Sunday Post under the headline, "9-year-old with a gift helps dozens heal in a city park." They didn't share his full name, respecting his quiet request, but people found out anyway. A local doctor, intrigued by the anecdotal evidence and the palpable change in the park, offered to mentor him. A nonprofit asked if they could fund some equipment for the park sessions. Someone else offered free tutoring. For the first time since his mother passed, people didn't just look at Zeke with pity or indifference. They saw him. They saw his gift. But Zeke never bragged. He still laid out the towel the same way every Sunday. Still used the same duct-taped boots. Still checked in with Isla first before helping anyone else. But now the park that once echoed with silence and sore bodies had become a place filled with movement, laughter, and hope. And a boy who had no home had become the heart of something bigger than himself. It had been 9 Sundays. 9 Sundays of towels laid on grass, of Isla's knees lifting higher, of small victories shared with strangers who'd become something closer to family. But this Sunday was different. Zeke could feel it before they even pulled up to the park. The air was warmer, pregnant with anticipation. The trees swayed a little slower. Even Isla was quieter in the back seat, focused, almost like she was preparing for something big. When they arrived, a small crowd had already formed. Nothing loud or flashy, just families setting up folding chairs, therapists kneeling in front of kids, parents with hopeful, anxious eyes. And right in the middle of it all was that same worn-out bench under the oak tree. Zeke didn't say anything at first, just unpacked his bag, rolled out the towel, and gave Isla a look. "You ready?" She nodded. No smile, just that look again, serious, determined. Jonathan wheeled her to the center of the mat. Zeke knelt in front of her. "Same as before," he said softly. "We help you stand. You do the rest." Jonathan moved behind her and placed his hands under her arms, ready to provide support. Zeke took her legs, guiding them gently into position. "Okay," Zeke whispered. "On 3. Isla closed her eyes, her small face a mask of fierce concentration. 1, 2, 3. Jonathan lifted. Zeke steadied her knees, his small hands firm and confident. And then she stood. Her legs trembled. Her arms shook. But she was up, on her own 2 feet. The crowd fell silent, a collective intake of breath. Some kids gasped. One mother clapped a hand over her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Isla opened her eyes slowly, blinking in the sunlight, and then a slow, radiant smile spread across her face. "I'm standing." Zeke blinked back something in his eyes, a moisture he quickly suppressed. "Yeah, you are." Jonathan froze for a second, like he couldn't breathe, couldn't believe. Then slowly, carefully, he let go. She stayed up. He stepped back, shaking, his own legs suddenly weak. She's doing it." Zeke stepped back too, just a little. "She's been doing it." Isla took one shaky step, then another. And then, because she was 6 and brave and didn't yet know how to be afraid, she took a 3rd step, all on her own, before falling, laughing and crying, into her father's outstretched arms. He caught her, his hands trembling as he held her close, burying his face in her sweet-smelling hair. "You did it," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You really did it." Isla turned to Zeke, her face still wet with tears but shining with triumph. "You said I would." He gave her a small grin, a rare, joyful sight. "I said we'd try." That afternoon, nobody left the park in a hurry. People stayed, talked, hugged, some prayed. Zeke sat back on the bench and watched it all. He didn't say much. He never did. Later that night, Jonathan stood in the kitchen while Zeke poured cereal into a bowl, the quiet sounds of a settled home filling the space. "You know," Jonathan said, his voice thick with emotion, "you changed everything." Zeke didn't look up, just stirred his cereal. "I did." Jonathan walked over and placed a hand on the boy's small shoulder. "My daughter walked today, and not because of a hospital or a doctor or a miracle drug. She walked because a kid with nothing decided to show up again and again, even when nobody asked him to. Even when he had every reason not to." Zeke nodded, a quiet understanding in his eyes. "That's what my mom would have done." Jonathan's throat tightened, a lump forming. "I wish she could have seen this." "She did," Zeke said softly, meeting Jonathan's gaze. "I think she sees everything." Jonathan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Zeke," he said quietly, his voice raw, "you're going to change a lot of lives." Zeke looked up at him, a flicker of something profound in his young eyes. "I already am. There are people in this world who might not have fancy degrees, shiny resumes, or a perfect past. But they carry something far more valuable: heart, grit, and a reason to keep showing up. Sometimes the most broken people are the ones holding the tools to help others heal.